My name is Danny, and welcome to Ale and Agony. Welcome on in. Let's get cozy and talk about murder. And good news, Apple Podcasts now only have us listed just the once. A woohoo! But that does unfortunately mean that we have lost the very first 2 and original 5-star reviews that we had. So, if you're listening and you wrote those reviews, please post them on the new feed. It would mean so much. If you could, I know it takes a couple of minutes. I appreciate you've already done it the once. Totally get it. But it would make me happy. Before we get into today's case, let's start with the ale of this week. And I am drinking my all-time favourite that I am yet to find. Another ale that I love more than this one. And this is the St. Peter's Organic Pale Ale. So get yourself cozy, because I'll be telling you about the case of Chris Benoit. So let's crack it open. That was a good one. So Chris Benoit. Sounds familiar, right? Well, Mr. Benoit was a professional Canadian wrestler who held 22 championships across multiple wrestling federations. And he was hugely popular during the reign of other big household name wrestlers such as Edge, Chris Jericho, The Undertaker, Batista, Triple H, The Rock, and John Cena, just to name a few. Benoit was widely regarded as one of the most popular, respected, and gifted technical wrestlers in WWE history. Reading up on this case has given me some serious nostalgia because I used to love WWF, which is now known as WWE. And I had flashbacks to Rikishi, like bonsai dropping and stink facing his butt all over the ring. And I was the biggest fan of The Rock at the time. And I remember I had a little black and white TV in my bedroom, and I had to hold the antenna on the TV at a certain position throughout the entire show to get a clear picture, and it was totally worth it. But researching this case had me like flip-flopping between that sweet nostalgia and just being absolutely crushed, if I'm honest. I didn't expect this case to hit a nerve with me, but it really fucking did. So why am I talking about Chris Benoit? Well, on June 22nd, 2007, Chris murdered his wife, Nancy, along with their 7-year-old son, Daniel, and he then committed suicide. It's fucking rough. But how did he get there? So let's take it back. Chris grew up wanting so much to be like his idol, the Dynamite Kid, and he started going to wrestling matches at the age of 12, and he then started lifting weights from only 13 years old. His dad Mike has since expressed regret in supporting his son's dreams, and he wonders what would have happened if, he never bought him the weights or if he never took him to the matches. And there's pictures of Chris between the ages of 13 and 18, and he looks like a fucking built man. I don't know how else to describe it. He does not look 13, 14, 15. It's insane the amount of muscle that this kid packed on. So Chris continued working out, and he started to develop a very high-risk style. And 5 years later, at the age of 18, he began his wrestling career at Stampede Wrestling. And a perfect example of Chris being a true showman and a performer and putting entertainment before his own health was his signature move that he developed and called the diving headbutt, which is exactly what it sounds like, and it's super fucking dangerous. And when Stampede Wrestling closed its doors in 1989, Chris moved on to NJPW, which is New Japan Pro Wrestling. And whilst there, he spent some more time training and developing his technical skills. And he won his first major championship in 1990 under the name of the Pegasus Kid. And like many wrestlers, Chris would change his name a fair few times over the years. So he was previously known as the Rabid Wolverine, and the Crippler, and the Broom, I'm not quite sure where the broom came from, and the Canadian crippler, before settling on the infamous and simple Chris Benoit. Chris transitioned between a few wrestling federations, but most famously, he was at World Championship Wrestling, also known as WCW. And whilst there, he won 10 championships. And then he went on to World Wrestling Federation, which is now known as World Wrestling Entertainment. And he won a further 15 championships, including the World Heavyweight Championship. So Chris was a big fucking name in the wrestling world. So how'd you manage to get this far in this hugely competitive world of professional wrestling? Well, the big man himself, Vince McMahon, who is the chairman of the WWE, saw huge potential in Chris. He had these amazing technical skills. He was a showman. You know, this is exactly what Vince was looking for. And Vince was known to like his wrestlers to look pretty big and beefy. Because if we go back, the more traditional wrestlers way back when were more like your uncle down the pub. You know, they had a bit of a big gut, they were beardy. It was a much more achievable, everyday American man. But being a wrestler himself, Vince wanted to change the view on wrestlers, and he would use a lot of steroids. And he would then encourage his employees to do the same to get that very unachievable, pumped up look. So Chris would start taking steroids himself, and at one point it said that he was getting a 10-month supply of steroids every 3 to 4 weeks. And the steroids that they would take were likely anabolic steroids, which are used specifically to reduce fat and then to gain muscle mass. But there are some really shitty side effects to them. And the term Roid Rage is very common. I'm sure you've heard of that term. And it refers to the aggressive behaviour and mood swings that you can suffer with extended use. And if Chris is getting a 10-month supply every month, I can't imagine the toll that it would take on his mind. It can also cause paranoia and hallucinations, and then later on down the line, they can cause blood clots and heart attacks. So imagine all these ridiculously built, pumped up men, all hopped up on steroids, throwing each other around. And yeah, it's scripted, but a chair to the back of the head is still going to fucking hurt. Same as jumping from great heights and landing on each other. So injuries were incredibly common, but they couldn't take time off. You know, they had this schedule, they had to fight each other, they had to keep that story going. So what can you do? The WWE had their own medical team, and they would recommend prescriptions of opioids and other painkillers to allow the fighters to keep pushing through their injuries. I haven't seen many opioids in the UK. I have seen tramadol and I have seen codeine, which are both forms of opioids, and they are prescription only. And so I looked up what opioid addiction is because I'm aware that it is a massive problem. And Chris was believed to be taking opioids throughout his career to deal with his ongoing injuries, alongside his steroids. So the problem with opioids and what makes them addictive is that they alter your brain by creating artificial endorphins. And as well as blocking out physical pain, these endorphins would also, they make you feel good. Too much opioid use can cause your brain to rely on those artificial endorphins. And then once your brain starts doing that, it can even stop producing its own endorphins altogether. So say you've been on opioids for, a few weeks, you've had a bad back injury, maybe you've hurt your ankle, and it's time to come off them now, You've run its course. But withdrawal from these drugs can be pretty grim. And the most common side effects can include sweating and chills, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, shaking, depression, insomnia, fatigue, and of course the pain comes back. And, I don't think you can get through these symptoms whilst you're out on the road and touring. Things like diarrhea, vomiting, sweating, fatigue, that's not going to cut it, is it? You won't be able to go out and fight and continue climbing the ladder to win championship after championship. And Chris was putting himself in so much danger. And he was more than willing to take a chair to the back of the head, which most other wrestlers avoided. And he had, of course, his infamous diving headbutt. On top of that, he had all the other standard injuries that his fellow wrestlers were also racking up. So Chris is using opioids, as well as his steroids, and he's getting to the peak of his career. Like, he is an idol in WWE. Everyone knows who this guy is, and everyone speaks so highly of him. Part of the gig was, of course, going out on tour with the other wrestlers. And from what I've understood, you live in really close quarters, often really cheap, shitty hotels. You're cramped in very small tour buses. And, these guys are big. So everyone was cramped in like sardines. And you spend all that time together, you become close, you make really good friends. And in particular, Chris became best friends with fellow wrestler Eddie Guerrero. And their friendship was born following a match where Benoit knocked Eddie out cold when he kicked Eddie in the head. And that apparently sparked a bromance between the two of them. And these two were really close. They spent so much of their time outside of the ring together, as well as when they had their downside from touring. They went on holidays, they trained together, and their families knew and loved each other. They were brothers. And on November 13th, 2005, Eddie was found unconscious in his hotel room in Minnesota, and he was found by his nephew and fellow wrestler, Chavo Guerrero. Eddie was pronounced dead upon the ambulance's arrival at the scene, and he was only 38 years old. And an autopsy revealed that Eddie died as a result of acute heart failure. And many speculate that this was down to the extensive steroid use over his career. And Eddie's death hit Chris hard. During the WWE Raw tribute to Eddie in November 2005, Chris told the world about how he felt. And I'll play that for you now.
Eddie Guerrero is my best friend, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that he knew that would be able to say the same thing about him. He was such a beautiful person, such a kind-hearted person. I couldn't find the words. Words couldn't describe what kind of a human being Eddie truly was. I've known Eddie for just about 15 years and spent a good portion of them 15 years with him on the road. We've laughed together, cried together, fought each other. We've been up and down each and every mountain, each and every highway. And Eddie always led by example. He was the one friend that I had that I could go to and pour my heart out to if I was going through something, if I had a personal issue or a personal problem. He was the one guy that I could call and talk to and know that he would understand and he would talk me out of it, because of all the experiences that he'd been through. I believe in leading by example, and Eddie always led by example through his life, through the obstacles that he went through and conquered and became a better person. And he'd often use that as an example. A lot of times we traveled on the road together. So on the road, it's so chaotic. And so, from the time we got up in the morning, we'd be 2 hours behind schedule. But it's funny because we'd pull up to a gym and we'd find ourselves sitting outside the gym for up to an hour and a half, just talking. We'd just sit in the car talking about life, talking about the past, present, future. We just talk about life. Eddie was that kind of friend to me, and not only then, but after the shows, it'd be 1 a.m, and we'd be sat in the car till 3 a.m, talking about life, talking about things and issues and problems and everything. We talked about everything, and we never left each other without telling each other that we loved each other. And I truly can say that I love Eddie Guerrero. He's a man that I can say I love, and I love his family, and my heart and my thoughts and my prayers go out to his wife Vicky, Shaw, Cheryl, and Kaylee. can't imagine the sorrow that they're going through right now, and the emotions that they're feeling. But I want them to know that my prayers and my thoughts are with them. And Eddie, I know that you're in a better place, and I know that you're looking down on me right now. Not only know that I love you, I miss you. Eddie, you made such a great impression on my life, and I want to thank you for everything you've ever given me. And I want to thank you from my heart and tell you that I love you and I'll never forget you. And now we'll see each other again. I love you, Eddie.
I find that clip really hard to listen to because you can just hear that this man, his heart is broken. And you hear him at the end saying that, you know, they'll see each other again. And it's just so ominous knowing what we know now. And many people believe that Eddie's death was the beginning of Chris's demise. And they say that if Eddie had been around, he could have talked Chris down from anything. And Chris, you know, he said that himself. And after Eddie died, Chris kept a personal diary and he would use it to write to Eddie after he passed away. And his diary became an open letter to his best friend, and he'd tell Eddie about competitions, about touring, about stuff that he was up to with his family, and about, you know, dreams that he'd had. And I've had a look down the long list of wrestlers who have died before they were 50. And the vast majority were heart failure, heart attack, heart complications, or suicide. And on Friday, June 22nd, 2007, nearly 18 months after Eddie passed away, Chris Benoit killed his wife Nancy in an upstairs bedroom. She was found with her limbs bound behind her back, and her body was wrapped in a towel, and a copy of the Bible was left by her body. Nancy's injuries indicated that Chris had pressed a knee into her back while pulling on a cord around her neck and strangled her to death. 7-year-old Daniel was suffocated and killed in his bedroom, and a copy of the Bible was also left by his body. Daniel had internal injuries to the throat area, and the reports determined that Daniel had been sedated with Xanax, and he was likely unconscious when he was killed. And Daniel's body had also only just started to show signs of decomposition, and it was not as far along as Nancy's. So it's believed that Nancy was killed first, and then Daniel was killed a good number of hours, maybe even the following day later. Chris Benoit then went on to commit suicide by hanging himself. Chris used a weight machine cord to hang himself by creating a noose from one end of the cord on a pull-down machine. Chris then released the weights, causing his strangulation. And Nancy's sister Sandra later clarified some details, and she said that over the weekend, after he'd committed the murders, the search history on Chris's computer showed that he had researched the quickest and easiest way to break a neck, and he then proceeded to kill himself. But why? Why did Chris do this? So we've already got the steroids, we've got the opioids, we've got the constant stress of touring. You know, he's excelling in his career. We've got the loss of his best friend, Eddie. And an autopsy showed that Chris Benoit had also suffered from a type of brain damage called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which I'll be calling CTE because that is a hard word, I tell you. And this was found in all regions of his brain. CTE is caused by multiple concussions and blows to the head, and it's often found in boxers. But the biggest issue is that it's really hard to diagnose while someone is alive, and it can mainly be found during an autopsy. So typical symptoms of someone suffering from CTE are changes in mood. So, frequent mood swings, depression, and feeling increasingly anxious, frustrated, or agitated. There's also increased confusion and disorientation. So, for example, getting lost, wandering around, or not knowing what time of the day it is, as well as difficulty thinking. So, you might find it hard to make decisions. And it was famously stated during Chris Benoit's autopsy that his 40-year-old brain was comparable to an 85-year-old dementia patient, which just shows the extent of damage that CTE has done to him. I will include a photo, which is a side-by-side of a standard sort of more healthy brain versus Chris's brain scans. And you can see for yourself, it's super clear that he's got so much damage. And there are a lot of symptoms here that all have the same output. Whether it's the opioids, the steroids, or the CTE, there are causes of mood swings, depression, and anxiety. So the main theory here is that Chris was suffering with depression and anxiety caused by the steroids, opioids, and the CTE, as well as struggling with the loss of his best friend, and this pushed him so far off of the edge that he murdered his wife and son and then committed suicide. But the truth is, we don't know. We don't know if that is the case, and we'll never know why this happened, because it died with Chris. His friends, former wrestlers, and people that knew him the best had some things to say on the topic. So there's Stevie Ray, who's a former wrestler and friend of Chris's, and he recalls a particular time where he was getting into an argument with Chris's best friend, Eddie Guerrero. So everyone's out on tour, and the stress of being away from home was really starting to get to Stevie, and he refused to give his fans any autographs. So Eddie called him out on it and was like, none of us are particularly happy about the situation, but don't take it out on the fans. But Stevie was just so frustrated that he threatened to kick Eddie's ass. And they got into this massive argument, and luckily nothing happened. They split up and they went their separate ways. A few hours later, Chris was at Stevie's hotel room door, checking in on Stevie. He wasn't there to defend Eddie or, have a go at him for, starting on his friend or anything like that. He was honestly just saying, I'm always around if you want to talk. And Stevie said that Chris would never be on the list of people who he thought could do this. He went on to say maybe Chris and Nancy had a volatile relationship, but he doesn't know. What he does know is that he never once saw Chris upset, and he described him as a peacemaker, and he was always very level-headed. There's then Kevin Sullivan, who's a former wrestler and turned booker, and he's also actually Nancy's ex-husband. And he also believes that the cause was more likely to be a tiff between Chris and Nancy rather than the medical issues. There's also another former wrestler called Black Bart, who during the interview is clearly in awe of Chris's talents and does not believe that Chris killed his son and his wife. His theory is that he thinks his wife Nancy had something to do with it. He thinks that Chris found his son dead and he couldn't handle his loss and he killed himself, which has been a popular theory that I've read online, that people think that Nancy killed Daniel and then Chris found Daniel's body, he couldn't handle it, maybe he snapped, he murdered Nancy and then couldn't handle it, killed himself. But the way that the autopsy goes is that, it appears that Nancy died first and then Daniel died afterwards, so that doesn't quite match that theory. And so many people want to see the good in Chris. I haven't found anybody that says, oh yeah, definitely saw that coming, this guy was crazy. Everyone is like, I don't believe it. It must be the woman. She must have pushed him. She must have had something to do with it. No one will believe that he just snapped, killed his wife, killed his son, killed himself without anything. Chris has another son called David from his first marriage, and he still looks up to Chris. He admires him so much that he himself is actually training to become a wrestler. And last year he told an interviewer that He has his costume all sorted out and it's just like his dad's, and his fighting style is also really similar to Chris's. And David also just does not believe that his father could have committed these crimes. And this case has had me rocking back and forth between hating Chris for what he did and then empathizing with him for the demons that he had to battle on a daily basis. But I do want to make it clear that although I sympathize for Chris Benoit, I do not condone what he did. He did not seek any help before getting to the point of murdering his wife and his 7-year-old son. And I'll be honest with you, there is so much more research that I could do on this case, but this one just hit me fucking hard, and it took me to a place that I've not been in for nearly a decade, and it's a place that I'm incredibly lucky to come out of alive, and this one just got a bit too real for me. And I have spoken to a few people about this case, and everyone has said the same thing. When they heard about it, they were so shocked and they just didn't see it coming. And it was a huge deal at the time. Do you have any stories or theories about this case? Like, do you remember when it was announced? Did you watch the event? Like, let me know on the Instagram post. And that, my friends, is the story of Chris Benoit. But let's take it back to the very beginning. How was my ale? So, Lord knows I fucking need it. God damn. As I've said, St. Peter's Organic Pale Ale. It's my favourite. I love it. It's crafted in the UK. It's crafted in a place called Suffolk. And it's just delicious. It's really crisp. And it's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's like clean, almost like appley, but it's still got so much hoppiness to it. It's delicious. It's my absolute favourite. And one of the things I like about it as well, which has got nothing to do with the ale really, is the bottle that it comes in. So it comes in a green glass bottle, but it's almost sort of flattened. It's hard to describe until you see it. What I would say is if you were going to try and buy it in the UK, Morrison's have it. I buy it every time I go to Morrison's. It's on there 4 for £6. So you get 4 bottles for £6. And it's really good. If you would like to give it a try and then let me know what you thought, I'd appreciate it. Or if you can recommend any others, if you're a fan of that one as well, that'd be great. Because it's my favourite. So I'm going to make sure I leave some links in the show notes. So I watched a documentary on YouTube called Death Grip that I'll include, as well as the interviews with Chris's friends that I mentioned, as well as the interview last year with his son David. You can find updates about new episodes over on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll be sure to post all the photos of this case over on the Instagram page. And both pages can be found under Ale and Agony. And if you want to support the show and you have some spare cash and you want to throw it at me and support the show, then you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/aleandagony, and I'll be sure to give you a shout out next episode. And then last week I also released my first ever mini-sode on there about automatism. So if you listen to episode 5, hopefully you remember what that word means. It's a cheeky pop quiz. Come on now, what is automatism? And just another massive thank you to Jonas, Brett and Natalie for being my current patrons. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. If you guys would like to be part of the cool gang, it costs £3 a month. What a bloody bargain. So please do check out patreon.com/aleandagony. And I would be, of course, as always, very grateful for any feedback if you want to come and get involved on the Twitter, on the Instagram. And, if you guys are on Apple Podcasts is the only place that you can post a official review. So please leave one. Let me know what you think. It would be great if it was 5 stars, don't get me wrong, but, tell me how you really feel. But thank you so much for spending this time with me. Well done on getting it through to the end. And I will catch you on the next episode. Goodbye, my friends.